There's a hauntingly forgotten place called the Royal Hawaiian Motel, which has been abandoned for what feels like more than a decade. As someone who often delves into solo urban exploration, especially at night, I found this place intriguing, yet unsettling. Located in the blistering heat of Baker, California, the motel's harsh daytime temperatures made nightfall the perfect time for exploration. The structure was incredibly accessible. I parked my car by the roadside and strolled over without having to navigate any fences or security barriers. This ease of access made it one of the simpler locations I've ever explored. The motel's back area was dominated by a deep, empty pool, now a canvas for vibrant, chaotic graffiti. With my flashlight sweeping across the motel, I noticed that many of the upstairs rooms had doors that were either slightly ajar or completely shattered. This decay, while unsettling, was to be expected given the motel's long abandonment. The property had clearly suffered from more than just neglect. Parts of it looked like they had been consumed by fire, with charred remnants scattered about. It was eerily quiet, aside from the occasional sound of my shoes crunching over debris. But then, a disquieting sound pierced the stillness, a faint, almost ethereal female voice. My instincts screamed that this could be someone involved in security, or worse, someone who might pose a threat. I quickly ducked out of sight and slipped into one of the ground floor rooms, turning off my flashlight as I did. Inside, the room was a grim sight. The walls were plastered with layers of graffiti, and the only remnants of its past occupants were a dusty mattress and a dilapidated dresser. The isolation of the location made it hard to believe that anyone would come here to sleep. After a tense minute, I turned my flashlight back on, casting a weak beam that danced across the room's grim details. Gathering my nerves, I exited and continued my exploration, peering into each ground floor room under the upper walkway. Each room revealed more of the same: ruined furniture and various graffiti scrawled on walls, giving the impression of a place long forgotten by time. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from above, making my heart race. It sounded like something had fallen or been thrown. I immediately directed my flashlight toward the upper walkway, its beam cutting through the darkness. The possibility that it might be an animal crossed my mind, but given the nature of such places, there was always the chance of encountering other explorers or even homeless individuals. Determined to find out, I headed up the stairs. As I ascended, I peered into each room I passed. They were uniformly filled with broken furniture, rotting mattresses, and scattered debris. The further I ventured, the more pronounced a rhythmic thumping became. Thump, pause, thump, pause. It was a slow, deliberate noise that grew louder with each step. Someone was definitely up there. When I reached the door of the room where the sound seemed to originate, the banging abruptly stopped. My instincts told me that whoever or whatever was making the noise might have heard my approach. I called out gently, announcing that I was merely an explorer and meant no harm. I cautiously peered into the room with my flashlight off, straining to see through the near-total darkness. A vague shape caught my eye, deep inside the room near the back wall. The smell was overpowering, a nauseating blend of decay and filth. I hesitated, then carefully turned my flashlight back on, starting by pointing it at the floor before gradually shifting it toward the interior. What I saw next was a scene from a nightmare. Two pale, bare feet moving rapidly toward me. My reaction was instinctive. I quickly raised the beam higher, revealing a woman with a bloodied forehead and yellowish gunk smeared around her mouth, which hung open in a grotesque, haunting expression. The sight was chilling beyond words. Without a second thought, I fled. Behind me, her shrieks pierced the night air, and I could hear her footsteps gaining on me. I raced down the stairs, out of the building, and all the way back to my car, adrenaline pumping. The woman didn't follow me beyond the motel's grounds, but the fear lingered. Once safely in my car, I dialed my friend George, a fellow urban explorer who had originally been invited but couldn't join me. I relayed the horrifying encounter, and we both concluded that the rhythmic banging was likely the woman repeatedly slamming her head against the wall, which explained the blood on her forehead. I briefly considered calling the police, but quickly realized that reporting the incident would mean admitting to trespassing. Instead, I drove around the vicinity, searching in vain for a payphone to make an anonymous call. With payphones long obsolete, my efforts were futile. Finally, I called the non-emergency police line and reported a deranged woman in the area, making sure to stress that I hadn't personally discovered her. I kept my report vague and hung up quickly, eager to distance myself from the scene. I have no idea if the police ever investigated the motel, but I hoped that whatever was troubling that woman would be addressed. In all my years of urban exploration, I had never encountered anything so deeply unsettling, and I hoped never to experience anything like it again. A few years ago, I used to live in a small town, but my family made the decision to move us 4 hours away, hoping to escape the chaos. While my parents were out of town, searching for new houses, I invited a friend over, and together we called up my cousins for a spontaneous road trip. The destination I had in mind was forbidden, but we were thrill seekers, eager to experience something truly terrifying. We chose a place about 2 to 3 hours away, an old abandoned asylum called Oak Ridge Hospital. The place was rumored to be haunted due to its dark history. It was a psychiatric facility where the mentally ill were kept, and there were whispers of mistreatment and unspeakable torture. Over time, as the number of patients dwindled, the facility was shut down and the building slowly fell apart, consumed by nature. We decided to set off around 11 p.m., aiming to arrive by 2 a.m. The car ride was exhilarating, filled with laughter and anticipation of what we might encounter. By the time we reached the hospital, it was close to 3 a.m. We parked at the beginning of a dirt road leading to the building. For a few minutes, we just sat there, staring at the dark, uninviting path ahead of us, all feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. After what felt like an eternity, we decided to push forward, driving down the seemingly endless road, surrounded by overgrown grass and trees. It was pitch black, and the only light we had came from the car's headlights. Finally, we arrived at the hospital, and the sight of it left us speechless. The massive building loomed over us, its roof rotted away, and vines crawling up its decaying walls. In what was once the parking lot stood an old fountain, now overrun by plants. The darkness was so thick that we could only see what the headlights illuminated. We turned off the car and stepped out, making our way inside. The first thing I noticed were pentagrams spray-painted on the walls. We continued exploring, climbing what remained of the stairs, though they were barely intact. We even found a ladder and climbed to what was left of the roof. As we looked around, a light appeared in front of the building. It looked like the glow of a phone screen. We shouted, but no one responded, and the light disappeared as quickly as it had come. Feeling uneasy, my cousin suggested we move to another room to ensure we were safe, but something didn't feel right. I wandered off on my own into a nearby room filled with old mattresses and even more graffiti. As I explored, I heard a faint sound, like a pebble hitting the window. I brushed it off and rejoined my group. We decided to check out the basement, but getting down there was no easy task since the stairs were mostly destroyed. We took a moment to catch our breath, but then we heard a voice, a low, unsettling sound from the back of the room. We froze, exchanging nervous glances. My cousin cautiously moved toward the sound, shining his flashlight. As the beam reached the far corner, we saw someone squatting, facing the wall. My cousin backed away slowly, keeping the light on the figure. Once he rejoined us, we started to leave, but my cousin called out to the person, asking if they were okay. The man turned around, staring at us with a blank expression. For a moment, everything was silent, but then the man let out a blood-curdling scream and charged at us. Panic surged through us as we bolted in every direction. I remember scrambling through the darkness, my heart racing as I tried to catch up with my cousins, whose flashlight beams were fading in the distance. I crashed into tree after tree, my whole body aching, but I finally caught up with them in a small clearing. We found a trail and tried to figure out our way back to the car. But after an hour of wandering, we realized we were going the wrong way. Exhausted, we backtracked, and eventually the hospital came back into view. We sighed in relief, knowing the car was close. But just as we approached, we heard rustling in the bushes by the building. Suddenly, a rock flew out, hitting my friend. We turned to see the man emerge from the shadows, and once again, we ran for our lives. He was far enough behind us that we managed to reach the car, get inside, and lock the doors. As we started the engine, the headlights flicked on, revealing the man sprinting towards us, smashing a glass bottle against the windows. Without hesitation, we sped away, the man's figure disappearing into the distance. The ride home was silent. None of us could speak. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. After that night, we never dared to explore abandoned places again. When I was 16, my brother Max, who had just turned 19, invited me on one of his creepy adventures. Max was always into exploring abandoned places, especially ones with rumors of strange activity. This time, it was an old, forgotten mansion on the outskirts of rural Alabama. He had heard about it from a friend, and it seemed like he didn't want to check it out alone. So, on a cloudy and unsettling afternoon, we set out. Max drove us through back roads until we reached a secluded spot surrounded by thick trees and bushes. He parked the car in such a hidden place that you wouldn't know it was there unless you were looking for it. From where we stopped, the mansion wasn't visible, but a cracked, overgrown road stretched out ahead of us. We started walking down it, with the cracked pavement barely recognizable under the tall weeds and grass pushing through the gaps. It was obvious no one had been there in years. As we walked, the air felt heavy, and the eerie silence of the countryside made me uneasy. Out of nowhere, Max tensed up and motioned for me to look behind us. When I did, I saw a woman in the distance, walking in our direction. She looked strange, but not in an obvious way. Her hands were folded behind her back, and she walked with a slow, steady pace, as if she were on a peaceful stroll. It was creepy how relaxed she seemed. "What should we do?" I whispered to Max, my voice shaking slightly. "Just act normal. Keep walking," Max replied. "Running would just make it weird." I nodded, but I couldn't stop myself from turning around again. The woman was getting closer. I could see her face now. She was smiling at us, a smile that sent chills down my spine. She then spoke, her voice oddly soft and calm. "Lovely day today, isn't it?" Max and I both replied in an awkward unison. "Yeah, it is," trying to keep things casual. But the tension between us was growing. We picked up our pace slightly, hoping she would lose interest and stop following. Instead, she kept coming, her footsteps drawing nearer. I glanced back again, and this time she was right behind us, still smiling, her hands still hidden behind her back. That's when she said something that sent a bolt of fear through me. "I have to go to bed now." Max and I exchanged horrified looks. Without saying a word, we silently agreed it was time to get away from her. We both quickened our steps, almost breaking into a run. Max, always the polite one, threw one last glance over his shoulder and said, "Have a good day, ma'am." But when we looked back again, she was gone. Just like that, vanished. She hadn't turned around or continued down the road. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. There was nothing but dense woods around us, so the only explanation was that she had slipped into the trees. My heart was pounding as the realization hit me. She had been following us, but now she was hiding somewhere nearby, watching. That thought alone made my skin crawl. Finally, we reached the mansion. It was a massive, crumbling structure covered in ivy, with most of the windows shattered or boarded up. The air around it was still, almost suffocating, as if the house itself was holding its breath. We found an entry point through one of the broken windows and carefully climbed in, trying to avoid the jagged edges of glass. Inside, the place was a time capsule. Dusty furniture was still in place, as if the previous occupants had left in a hurry but had no time to take anything with them. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of mold and decay. We wandered through the living room and kitchen, finding plates still on the table and even rotten food in the fridge. The sight of it, combined with the putrid smell, was enough to make me gag. It was like the house had been abandoned in an instant, and no one had come back since. The sense of being somewhere we didn't belong was overwhelming, but Max was determined to explore every inch. After checking out the first floor, we descended into the basement. It was just as cluttered as the rest of the house, but much more unsettling. The blue carpet was faded and stained, and the few rays of light that seeped in through the tiny windows did little to brighten the room. Papers, old books, and random trash were scattered across the floor, as if someone had been down there rummaging through everything. We didn't linger long. As we were about to head back upstairs, we heard it. A loud, distinct thud from above. Max and I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. For a moment, we didn't move, waiting to hear it again. Silence. We tried to convince ourselves that it was just the house settling, but the tension between us was palpable. We were on edge. The last area to explore was the upstairs. The staircase creaked with every step, adding to the oppressive silence that hung over the place. At the top, we found a bathroom directly in front of us, and to the left, a narrow hallway that led to several rooms. We headed left first, peeking into what looked like a guest bedroom. It was small, with an antique dresser and a dusty bed, but nothing out of the ordinary. Max left the room first, but suddenly I heard him whisper my name, his voice filled with fear. I stepped into the hallway and followed his gaze. At the end of the hall, standing in the doorway of another bedroom, was the woman. The same woman who had followed us down the road. She was standing there, her smile even wider, her eyes locked onto us. Her voice was soft but chilling. "Do you want to see what's behind my back?" Max didn't hesitate. He screamed, "Run!" and shoved me toward the stairs. We flew down the steps, adrenaline pumping through our veins as we ran for the front door. I glanced back, half expecting to see her chasing us, but she wasn't there. Still, we didn't stop until we were back at the car. Gasping for breath, we collapsed inside, Max immediately turning the engine on and speeding down the road. Neither of us spoke for the first few minutes. My heart was racing, and I couldn't stop thinking about her, about what she could have been hiding behind her back the whole time she was following us. We never found out who she was or why she was there. Maybe she was just some disturbed person living in that old house, or maybe she was something worse. But the thought that still haunts me to this day is, what was she holding behind her back?